Cops of Reddit, what is the most corrupt thing you've seen done by a co-worker on the job? So this isn't really an egregious abuse of power, but it's something I will always remember. I used to work a late night shift where I'd be driving home every night at about 1 AM. There is this one stretch of road that was always frustrating to me because you have to go through 6 traffic lights, and if you get hit by a red on one of them, you'll get hit with a red on all of them despite there being no other cars on the road. Well, one night on the way home, I got stopped by the first red light and cursed my luck. I cursed my luck again when shortly after a cop pulled up next to me. It wasn't uncommon for cops to pull me over this late at night. Probably for random DUI checks or something. And it was just us on the road that night. So we get through light number 1 and get stopped again at light number 2. I looked over at the cop and he rolled his eyes at me, which made me laugh, and I shrugged my shoulders to imply, well, what can ya do? Just gotta wait. And then the greatest thing happened. As we are rolling towards traffic light number 3, the cop flashed his lights for a second to cause the red to change to a green. He then proceeded to flash his lights at the next 3 traffic lights to trigger the green, so we didn't have to stop the rest of the way through. I'm not a cop, but this is the best misuse of police power I have personally witnessed. Years ago, during a particularly cold and snowy winter, I was coming home late one night early morning. The streets were pretty clear, as it had snowed right after a nice storm, and the roads were coated with a combination of black ice and compacted snow. As I am slowly driving down the road, I see someone in the distance spinning out and doing donuts in the middle of a 4-lane avenue. Not out of control, just slowing, doing spin-outs in the middle of the street. As I get closer, I notice it's a local city cop car. Just when I notice it's him, he must have noticed I was coming towards him because he recovered from his spin and pulled off into the closest side street. I pass where he pulled in and continued on my way. After I get about a quarter mile away, I see him in my rearview mirror pull back out onto the street and start doing his spin-outs again. I laughed all the way home. Guy I used to work with kept searching people on justifiable grounds, but they were on the thin side. For 3 searches running, the guys claimed that he stole either their money or drugs. Apparently he had a spotty history with similar allegations. Nobody ever actually came forward to make the complaint. I reported it, but if the victim doesn't report it, then there is nothing they can do. I am assuming they contacted the victim since we had their details on file, but I'm not entitled to details of the investigation. Thankfully that ducker is long gone for some other bullet. His wife is a detective and mysteriously some drugs went missing twice, which she blamed on me. However, investigation showed that I was not the last person to have touched them, and it seemed like she was trying to get back at me. She got investigated for those missing drugs. They amazingly turned up again, fallen behind a shelf in the property store which she found. Did the wife ever get caught or reprimanded in any way? No. They could never prove it wasn't simply mislaid. But she is one of the many being watched quite closely. To be fair, I'm on the watch list because there is a rumor I'm going round I'm sleeping with young criminals' mums and I smoke weed with them. Lol. Nobody does any illegal it around me because I announce early and often that I'll roll on them if they duck up. I provide examples as well. I'm not getting hemmed up over someone else's bullet. Read a memoir by a rookie detective who was tasked with investigating a possible serial killer. As the case dragged on for years with zero progress, she eventually got the extra manpower she had been arguing for. But the new cops on the case fixated on the wrong suspect and intentionally withheld evidence from the lead investigator in the hope of taking credit for their collar. In the meantime, dozens of prostitutes were brutally murdered. One of their aunties, working alone with no resources at all, managed to identify the killer and locate the scene of the crimes, but was ignored by police, who failed to arrest the man for a couple more years. During the investigation, a victim managed to escape with multiple stab wounds, ending up being treated in the same hospital as the killer. She had stabbed him back, and the police let him go free without charges. A friend of the killer reported him to police, and they still made no arrests. Anyway, the writer ended up with PTSD, and I almost got it myself from reading her book. Not cop but security. Found out after he was arrested that a co-worker was stealing state laptops. Because it had state confidential information, the NSA also went after him. Dumbus 19-year-old somehow found a good enough lawyer to put him on house arrest with his parents. Wish I'd kept his number just to find out who the lawyer was. Father was a cop. One of my favorites is that the first sheriff he was under started his day with a case of beer in his office. The 7 AM patrol shift would show up early and help him with a beer before going out on the road. The 70s were a different time. Another good one is when a female LT grabbed the male Sarge by the balls and threatened to squeeze them if he didn't get on board with some questionable policy she was implicating. Wrong word. Correct one, close bit is escaping me. Son of a police officer in Germany here. Tons of Smollett. Stealing from each other. Deliberately drawing a produce out to make the other person late, etc. But the worst, superiors strategically bullying others if they dislike them or are jealous. The absolute worst is probably when they are in training and get their guns. A surprising amount of officers in training end up committing suicide. UK dude here. Not me but my father. When we were younger we had planned to go to a big indoor water park, Wet n Wild. I don't remember what the occasion was but something like a birthday. Anywho. On said day his car broke, so instead of letting us down he got a friend to take him to work and he borrowed a undercover police car for the day. Needless to say they found out and I believe he got demoted for it. I was young though. Not a cop but the most corrupt thing I've personally seen cops do was back in 2001, before camera phones, in San Francisco. Me and my friends were DJing this after party and the SFPD showed up to bust it. The two hostesses went out to try and talk them out of a raid. I watched from a second-story window as they chatted. And then the two male cops pulled out a roll of circular SFPD stickers. They proceeded to paste the stickers on the breasts of the hostesses and growled the it out of their tits. Then they left laughing and the two girls came in all freaked out. We called the SFPD complaint line but absolutely nothing happened. My friend even got a letter to the editor about the incident published in the now defunct Bay Guardian newspaper and absolutely nothing happened. Late husband once told me two stories as a state trooper in the 70s. Although number one is not corrupt. He worked in a state that was rural and vast. A long way from point A to B. So after a long shift he was on his way back to the station. He sees a drunk driver in front of him. He realizes if he pulled this guy over, he would have to test him, arrest him, wait for a tow, and book him into the station. All this would add another 4 hours onto a long shift. He pulls the guy over, drunk, cuffs the guy to one of his own tires. He puts the cuff keys at a reachable distance and goes home. Hubby figured when the DUI was sober enough, he could undo the cuffs and go on his merry way. 2. The department was getting multiple domestic abuse calls from neighbors. This husband was repeatedly beating on his wife. Remember, there were no firm laws regarding domestic abuse. He and his fellow officers got tired of repeated calls, and frustrated when wife refused to press charges. So the next time there was a call, they again arrested him. This time the written arrest report had a comment how the husband resisted arrest and fell from the bottom of the stairs while going up to the cell, sustaining some broken ribs, bruising and stitches. Arresting officers also had some words with the guy. He never again beat his wife. Definitely not a cop but this is the infamous Windows 95 scam a lot of Melbourne cops were in on back in 1994-5. Shop windows get mashed every now and again in cities at night and they need to be repaired immediately. This is lucrative work for glaziers. And some started paying spotters fees to the person that reported the damage. This came out of the exorbitant fees they'd charge. Cops started smashing windows in stores themselves to claim the finder's fee. It got big. And started costing stores and their insurers a reload. Not a cop, but had a college friend that was a K9 unit. He taught his dog to signal on command if the dog couldn't find drugs on its own. He thought it was a cool thing he was showing me. I felt kind of disgusted. He knew how I knew my rights and how I didn't like new laws or government overreach. I guess he didn't think the police were the overreach part. So the dog signaled if it couldn't find drugs? Isn't that how K9 works? Or am I reading this wrong? It signaled in a way that it found drugs. Basically it would signal it found nothing, then the officer would lead the dog around the vehicle again and slip him his command and thus have a false positive. Not a cop, but worked for the courts at the time. The chief of police was fired and there were allegations he sexually assaulted a woman he arrested, and he was also extorting money. There's a pending FBI investigation about stealing drugs while working on an ARC team. I need to look it up and see what happened with that. Repeated theft of tens of thousands from the Boeing company. An entire crew of mechanics corroborating with a manager to receive little to no work, as well as leaving work and in some cases not even showing up while still being paid. Not a cop, but I am like 75% sure a detective recently killed in Baltimore was killed to prevent him from testifying against another cop. Dude was shot with his own gun. Had a different partner than normal that day and was set to testify in a grand jury against a dirty cop in a few days. There has been a $215K reward out for information that led to the case being solved, and the BPD had a huge chunk of the city on basically lockdown for several days and it hasn't yet smoked out a suspect. No ducking way was this some random act of violence. Was a security liaison for a railroad that had its own police department. Basically I did all the work and patrolling, but when anything happened I would have to radio the officers to make an arrest. One night I witnessed the severe beating of a homeless man who was caught riding on one of the trains. The man did nothing to warrant said beating. The officer broke his face is the only way I can put it. After the beating the officer looks at me and says, "You saw him spit on me and go for my gun." After taking him to the local jail, the officer offered to take me to McDonald's and over our meals tell me if I ever needed a recommendation he would be more than willing to give me one.